The flickering light of a single oil lamp cast long shadows across Molly Zimmerman's tiny bedroom as she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The year was 1876, and Trinity, Texas, had never been kind to a woman of her size. She quickly turned away, unable to bear the sight of her round face and ample figure that had made her the subject of cruel whispers and sidelong glances since she was a young girl. "You are going to be late, Molly," her mother called from downstairs. "The mercantile opens in 15 minutes. Molly sighed, pinning up her thick chestnut hair and adjusting her plain, dark dress, one of the few that still fit her expanding frame. At 24, she had resigned herself to a life of shadows, working in the back room of her father's mercantile, keeping the books and avoiding the stares of customers. Her mother had long since given up on finding her a husband, though she never missed an opportunity to remind Molly that if only you'd put down that fork once in a while, you might catch someone's eye. The stairs creaked under her weight as she descended, keeping her eyes fixed on the worn wooden steps. "There you are," her father, Henry Zimmerman, said without looking up from his newspaper. "I need you to take inventory today. The supply wagon should arrive by noon." "Yes, Papa," Molly replied, grateful for tasks that kept her hidden away in the storeroom, safe from the judgmental eyes of Trinity's townsfolk. The walk to Zimmerman's mercantile was mercifully short, just 3 buildings down from their modest home on the edge of town. Trinity wasn't large, a single dusty main street lined with wooden buildings. A saloon, a church, the sheriff's office, and a handful of businesses that served the ranchers and farmers from the surrounding area. Still, Molly kept her head down as she walked, trying to make herself smaller despite the impossibility of that task. She had just unlocked the back door of the mercantile when she heard the commotion, shouts, and the thunder of hoofbeats coming from the direction of the main street. "They're back," someone yelled. "The Jackson gang hit the bank in Cottonwood." Molly froze, her heart racing. The Jackson gang had been terrorizing the area for months, robbing banks and trains, leaving dead bodies in their wake. Trinity had been spared so far, but everyone knew it was just a matter of time before they turned their attention to their small town. She quickly slipped inside, locking the door behind her. Through the front windows, she could see people gathering in the street as Sheriff Wilson and his deputies mounted up, preparing to ride after the outlaws. Among them was a man she'd never seen before, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face partially hidden beneath the brim of a dusty black hat. "Who's that with the sheriff?" she heard Mrs. Porter ask as the older woman entered the store, not bothering to wait for Molly to finish opening up. "That's the bounty hunter," Mr. Porter replied, following his wife inside. "Rode in last night, name's Reed Jackson." Molly's eyes widened. "Jackson, like the gang," the Porters turned, seemingly noticing her for the first time. "Mrs." Porter's lips thinned in that familiar way that made Molly want to disappear. "His brother's the leader," Mr. Porter explained, his tone kinder than his wife's expression. "Come to bring him to justice, so they say, though I wouldn't trust a man willing to hunt his own blood." Molly watched through the window as the mysterious bounty hunter swung into the saddle with easy grace, his movements confident and precise. For just a moment, his eyes swept over the mercantile, and she could have sworn they met hers through the glass. She quickly stepped back, retreating to the safety of the storeroom. The day passed slowly, with customers coming and going, most bringing news and rumors about the Jackson gang. Molly kept to her work, counting inventory and updating the ledgers, emerging only when absolutely necessary. By closing time, she was exhausted from the constant tension of trying to remain invisible. She was just locking up when she heard footsteps on the wooden walkway outside. Turning, She found herself face to face with the bounty hunter. Reed Jackson was even more imposing up close, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that filled the doorway. His face was tanned and lined from years in the sun, with a scar running along his jawline. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue, sharp and assessing, yet with an unexpected gentleness. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep with a slight Texas drawl. "Store closed," Molly nodded, unable to find her voice. She clutched her keys tightly, painfully aware of how she must look flushed and flustered, her dress straining at the seams. "Shame," he said. "Was hoping to pick up some supplies before heading out at first light." I could open back up," Molly heard herself say, surprised by her own offer. "If you need something urgently." A small smile curved his lips. "That's mighty kind of you, miss." "Zimmerman, Molly Zimmerman, Reed Jackson." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation she took it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but careful. "And I wouldn't want to impose. Morning will do just fine." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the saloon down the street. A group of cowboys spilled onto the boardwalk, their loud voices carrying in the evening air. "There he is," one of them shouted. "Jackson. You got some nerve showing your face around here." Reed's expression hardened, but he didn't turn. Instead, he looked at Molly with those penetrating blue eyes. "You might want to head home now, Miss Zimmerman." She should have walked away, should have hurried home as he suggested. But something kept her rooted to the spot as 5 men approached, the smell of whiskey surrounding them like a cloud. "You deaf, Jackson?" the leader called, a tall, lean man with a mean squint. "I'm talking to you." Reed finally turned, his posture relaxed but alert. "Evening, gentlemen. Something I can help you with?" "Yeah, you can help by getting on your horse and riding out of Trinity. We don't need your kind here." "My kind." Reed's voice remained calm. "Jackson's." The man spat on the ground. "Your brother killed my cousin in that cottonwood robbery." "That's why I'm here," Reed said evenly. "To bring him in." The man laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Sure you are. More likely you're here to scout the town for him. Blood is blood." Molly watched the confrontation with growing alarm, especially when she saw the man's hand drift toward his holstered pistol. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Mr. Jackson was just inquiring about supplies for his journey. He's working with Sheriff Wilson." 5 pairs of eyes turned to her, and she immediately regretted drawing attention to herself. The leader's gaze raked over her dismissively, his lip curling in a sneer. "Well, well. The fat Zimmerman girl speaks up. Didn't know you had it in you." Molly felt the familiar burn of shame crawl up her neck, but before she could retreat, Reed moved, positioning himself slightly in front of her. "The lady was kind enough to help me," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "And I don't much care for the way you're speaking to her." The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this turn of events. The leader's face reddened with anger or embarrassment. Molly couldn't tell which. "You defending her honor, Jackson. Didn't think a girl like that had any to defend." Reed's movement was so fast Molly barely saw it happen. One moment he was standing beside her, the next he had the man by the collar, lifting him slightly off his feet. The other cowboys stepped back, hands hovering near their weapons but not drawing. "Apologize to the lady," Reed said, his voice deadly quiet. The man struggled, his face turning purple. "Go to hell." Reed tightened his grip. "After you apologize." For a terrifying moment, Molly thought there would be bloodshed. Then the saloon doors swung open again and Sheriff Wilson emerged, his hand resting on his gun belt. "What's going on here?" he demanded, taking in the scene. Reed released the man, who stumbled back, gasping. "Just a misunderstanding, Sheriff. These gentlemen were just leaving." Sheriff Wilson looked between Reed and the cowboys, then at Molly, who was trying desperately to fade into the background. "That right, Miss Zimmerman?" "Yes, Sheriff," she said quietly. "Everything's fine." The sheriff nodded slowly. "All right then, boys, I think you've had enough for one night. Time to head home." The cowboys hesitated, then shuffled off, muttering under their breath. The leader shot Reed a venomous glare before following his friends. Sheriff Wilson watched them go, then turned to Reed. "I need you clear-headed tomorrow, Jackson. We ride at dawn." Reed nodded. "I'll be ready." As the sheriff walked away, an uncomfortable silence fell between Molly and Reed. She was acutely aware of how she must appear to him, a pathetic, overweight woman who couldn't even defend herself against a few drunken insults. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "But you didn't need to do that." Reed studied her, his expression unreadable. "No one deserves to be spoken to that way, Miss Zimmerman. People in Trinity have been speaking to me that way my whole life," she admitted, immediately regretting her candor. "I'm used to it." Something flickered in his eyes, anger perhaps, or understanding. "That doesn't make it right." He gestured toward the darkening street. "May I walk you home?" The offer surprised her. Men didn't walk Molly Zimmerman home. Men didn't notice her at all unless it was to mock her. "That's not necessary," she said quickly. "It's just down the street. I insist." His tone was gentle but firm. "It would be my pleasure." The walk to her house was both the longest and shortest of Molly's life. She was painfully conscious of her labored breathing, the way her dress pulled tight across her belly, the sweat gathering at the nape of her neck despite the cool evening air. Yet Reed matched his long strides to her shorter ones, seeming in no hurry to be rid of her company. "How long have you lived in Trinity?" he asked as they walked. "All my life," Molly replied. "My father opened the mercantile when I was a baby. It's a nice town." She couldn't help the small, bitter laugh that escaped her. "Is it? I wouldn't know. I don't see much of it." Reed glanced at her and she wished she could take back the words. "I just mean I'm busy with the store," she added quickly. "That's not what you meant," he said quietly. They had reached her front porch and Molly stopped, unsure what to say. The light from the parlor window spilled out, illuminating her mother's silhouette as she peered through the curtains. "Thank you for walking me home, Mr. Jackson," she said formally, eager to escape his perceptive gaze. "Reed," he corrected. "And it was my pleasure, Miss Zimmerman." "Molly," he smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face and made her heart skip a beat. "Good night, Molly. I'll see you in the morning for those supplies." As she watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness, Molly couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in her carefully ordered world. But she quickly pushed the thought aside. Men like Reed Jackson didn't look twice at women like her. Whatever kindness he had shown her tonight was just that kindness, nothing more. She opened the door, bracing herself for her mother's inevitable questions and her father's distracted grunts from behind his newspaper. Her life would continue as it always had in the shadows, where it was safer to hide than to hope. But for the first time in years, a tiny, dangerous spark of something like hope had ignited in her chest. And try as she might, she couldn't quite extinguish it. The next morning dawned bright and clear, with a crispness to the air that hinted at the approaching autumn. Molly rose earlier than usual, taking extra care with her appearance, pinning her hair more neatly, choosing her least worn dress, even adding a touch of her mother's rose water to her wrists. "You're certainly up early," Margaret Zimmerman commented as Molly entered the kitchen. Her mother's sharp eyes didn't miss the small changes in her daughter's appearance. "And wearing your Sunday dress on a Tuesday. What's the occasion?" "No occasion," Molly replied, busying herself with preparing coffee to avoid her mother's scrutiny. "Just thought I'd open the store early today. We have that shipment coming in." Her mother made a non-committal sound, clearly not believing her but choosing not to press further. Molly ate her breakfast quickly, eager to escape the questions that hung in the air. "That bounty hunter walked you home last night," her father said suddenly, lowering his newspaper. "Mrs. Porter saw you." Of course she did, Molly thought. Nothing escaped the town gossips. "He was being polite," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "There was some trouble with the Cowboys from the Rockingham." Her parents exchanged a glance that Molly pretended not to notice. "Be careful around that man," her father warned. "His brother is a murderer." "And he's here to bring him to justice," Molly countered, surprised at her own defense of a man she barely knew. Her father's eyebrows rose. "Still, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Molly finished her coffee and stood. "I should get to the store. The wagon will be here soon." She left before they could say more, hurrying down the street to the Mercantile. The morning air felt good against her flushed cheeks, and for once, she didn't keep her gaze fixed on the ground. Instead, she found herself looking around at the town she'd lived in her entire life but rarely truly seen. Trinity was coming to life around her. The blacksmith already had his forge glowing, the smoke rising in a thin column against the blue sky. Mrs. Henderson was sweeping the boardwalk in front of her millinery shop, and the delicious smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. It was, as Reed had said, a nice town, at least on the surface. She was just unlocking the Mercantile's front door when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Looking up, she saw Sheriff Wilson and 4 deputies riding down the main street with Reed among them. Her heart quickened as his pale eyes found her, and he tipped his hat in greeting. "Molly," Sheriff Wilson called, reining in his horse. "Glad you're open. We need to stock up before we ride out." "Of course, Sheriff," she replied, pushing the door open wide. "Come in." The men dismounted, tying their horses to the hitching rail. Reed was the last to enter, hanging back as the others crowded into the store, calling out their needs. Coffee, bacon, hardtack. "Got any of those cigars from back east? Need more ammunition for my Winchester." Molly moved efficiently behind the counter, filling their orders with practiced ease. She was so focused on her work that she didn't notice Reed watching her until she looked up and caught his gaze. Unlike the others, he wasn't shouting out demands or pawing through merchandise. He simply stood, observing her with those penetrating eyes. "What can I get for you, Mr. Jackson?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. "Raid," he reminded her with a small smile. "And I need coffee, jerky, and ammunition for a Colt .45. She nodded, gathering his supplies. As she reached for the ammunition stored on a high shelf, she had to stretch, painfully aware of how her dress pulled tight across her body. A flush of embarrassment crept up her neck, but when she turned, Reed's expression hadn't changed. There was no disgust or mockery, only patience. "Will you be gone long?" she asked as she wrapped his purchases in brown paper. "Hard to say," he replied. "My brother's gang was headed north, according to the reports. Could be a few days, could be longer." She nodded, not sure why the thought of him leaving made her chest tighten. It was foolish to feel anything about a man she'd just met, especially one who would soon be gone from her life. "Be careful," she said softly, passing him the package. His fingers brushed hers as he took it, the brief contact sending a jolt through her. "I always am." Sheriff Wilson approached the counter, breaking the moment. "All set, Jackson. We need to move out." Reed nodded, his expression shifting back to the professional mask of the bounty hunter. "Ready, Sheriff." As the men filed out, Reed lingered for a moment. "Thank you for opening early, Molly." "It was no trouble," she assured him. He seemed about to say something else, but instead just tipped his hat and followed the others outside. Molly moved to the window, watching as they mounted up. Reed's horse, A magnificent black stallion pranced beneath him, eager to run. As if sensing her gaze, Reed turned in the saddle, looking back at the mercantile. Their eyes met through the glass, and he gave her a final nod before spurring his horse after the others. Molly watched until they disappeared from sight, then returned to her counter, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. It was ridiculous to feel this way about a man she barely knew, a man who had shown her simple kindness and nothing more. "Did you hear, Mrs.?" Porter asked eagerly as she bustled into the store an hour later. "That bounty hunter walked you home last night, and so it begins," Molly thought with resignation. "He was being polite," she said, the same response she'd given her parents, Mrs. Porter's eyes gleamed with the excitement of fresh gossip. "Well, it certainly got people talking. Handsome man like that taking an interest in—" She stopped abruptly, seeming to realize what she was about to say. "In someone like me." Molly finished for her, her voice steady despite the familiar pain. "Yes, I imagine that would be quite shocking." Mrs. Porter had the grace to look embarrassed. "I didn't mean, that is. What do you need today, Mrs. Porter, for once, Mrs.?" Porter didn't linger to chat, making her purchases quickly and leaving with a mumbled goodbye. As the door closed behind her, Molly leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted by the effort of maintaining her dignity. The next few days passed in a blur of routine: opening the store, serving customers, keeping the books, closing up, going home to her parents' house, eating dinner in silence, retiring early to her room with a book. But something had changed. The safety of invisibility that she had cultivated for years now felt like a prison. She found herself looking up when the door opened, hoping against hope to see a tall figure in a black hat, only to be disappointed each time. It was foolish, this feeling. Reed Jackson was gone, chasing his outlaw brother across the plains of Texas. Even if he returned to Trinity, what then? A few kind words and a protective gesture didn't mean anything. Men like him didn't court women like her. Yet each night she found herself standing before her mirror, really looking at herself for the first time in years. She saw the extra weight, yes, the round face, the thick waist, the heavy arms. But she also saw things she hadn't allowed herself to notice before: the rich chestnut of her hair, the clear gray of her eyes, the smoothness of her skin. Was it possible that there was beauty there, hidden beneath the shame she had carried for so long? On the 5th day after Reed's departure, a wagon arrived from the neighboring town of Cottonwood, bringing news that the Jackson gang had been spotted heading toward the border. The townspeople gathered outside the telegraph office, speculating about whether Sheriff Wilson and his posse would catch them. "That bounty hunter's probably in on it," Molly overheard Mr. Simmons say as he entered the mercantile. "Led our sheriff on a wild goose chase while his brother escapes to Mexico." "Now, Herbert," his wife chided, "we don't know that. Blood is blood," Mr. Simmons insisted, echoing the words of the drunk cowboy from days earlier. "You can't trust a Jackson." Molly bit her tongue, resisting the urge to defend Reed. What did she know about him, really? A few kind words and a moment of chivalry didn't reveal a man's character, yet something in her refused to believe the worst of him. As she was closing up that evening, a stranger entered the store, a weather-beaten man with the look of a ranch hand about him. "We're just closing," Molly began, but the man cut her off. "Are you Molly Zimmerman?" She nodded, suddenly wary. "I've got a message for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "From Reed Jackson." Her heart leapt at the name, and she took the paper with trembling fingers. "Thank you. How is he?" The man shrugged. "Alive last I saw. They cornered the gang in a box canyon near the border." "Nasty business." He tipped his hat. "Good evening, madam." As soon as he was gone, Molly unfolded the paper with unsteady hands. The note was brief, written in a strong, clear hand. "Molly, we've found them. It will be over soon, one way or another. I find myself thinking of you in quiet moments." Strange how a chance meeting can leave such an impression. "If all goes well, I'll return to Trinity within the week." She read the words over and over, scarcely believing they were meant for her. He was thinking of her. The idea seemed impossible, yet there it was, written in his own hand. That night, she couldn't sleep, her mind filled with images of gunfights and danger. What if he didn't return? What if his brother's gang was too much for the small posse from Trinity? The questions chased each other through her mind until dawn began to lighten the sky. The next few days were the longest of Molly's life. She went through the motions of her daily routine, but her thoughts were far away, with a man she barely knew but couldn't forget. She found herself standing straighter, speaking more confidently to customers, even venturing to the cafe for lunch instead of eating alone in the storeroom as was her habit. On the 7th day after Reed's departure, just as Molly was beginning to lose hope, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone in town to their windows and doors. Sheriff Wilson and his deputies rode slowly down the main street, their horses dusty and tired, their faces grim. Behind them came a wagon, and in it, tied and under guard, were 4 men, the remnants of the Jackson gang. But where was Reed? Molly's heart sank as she scanned the returning posse, seeing no sign of the tall bounty hunter or his black stallion. Had he fallen in the fight? Was he wounded, or worse? The possibility made her feel physically ill. She was so focused on the riders that she didn't notice the lone horseman approaching from the opposite direction, until a murmur went through the crowd. Turning, she saw him, Reed Jackson, riding tall in the saddle, his black hat pulled low over his eyes, his clothes dusty from the trail. But what caught everyone's attention was the man slumped across the saddle in front of him, bound and unconscious, a man who bore a striking resemblance to Reed himself. "He got him," someone whispered. "He really did bring in his own brother." Reed rode straight to the sheriff's office, not looking left or right. Molly watched, her heart pounding, as he dismounted and roughly pulled his brother down, half dragging him inside. She waited, hoping he might look for her, but he didn't emerge. As the crowd dispersed, disappointed that the drama seemed to be over, Molly returned to the mercantile, trying to focus on her work. He had returned as promised, but hadn't sought her out. Perhaps the note had meant less than she'd hoped. Perhaps, now that his job was done, he would simply collect his bounty and move on to the next hunt. The bell over the door jingled, and Molly looked up, her heart leaping when she saw Reed standing in the entrance. He looked exhausted, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw and a new cut above his left eyebrow, but his eyes were clear as they found hers. "You came back," she said softly. "I said I would." He moved toward the counter, his spurs jingling with each step. "Though it was a near thing, my brother doesn't surrender easily." "I heard you captured him yourself." A shadow crossed Reed's face. "Yes, it wasn't pleasant, but it's done now. He'll face justice for what he's done." There was pain in his voice, and Molly realized how difficult this must have been for him, hunting his own blood, bringing him to face what would likely be the hangman's noose. Without thinking, she reached across the counter and touched his hand. "I'm sorry. It must have been terrible for you." Reed looked down at her hand on his, then turned his palm up to clasp her fingers. His touch was gentle, at odds with the strength she knew he possessed. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not many people understand what it cost." They stood like that for a long moment, connected by their clasped hands and something deeper that neither could name. Then the bell jingled again as Mrs. Porter entered, stopping short at the sight before her. "Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, her eyes wide with surprise and curiosity. Molly started to pull her hand away, but Reed held firm, not releasing her fingers even as he turned to greet the older woman. "Madam," he said politely, "you're not interrupting. I was just thanking Miss Zimmerman for her kindness before I left town." Molly's heart sank. "You're leaving?" He turned back to her, his eyes softening. "I have to take my brother to Austin for trial, but I was hoping. That is, I wondered if you might write to me while I'm gone." "Write to you," she repeated, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I'd like to get to know you better, Molly Zimmerman," he said, seemingly oblivious to Mrs. Porter's presence. "If you're willing." Molly was acutely aware of Mrs. Porter watching with undisguised fascination, but for once she didn't care what the town gossip might think or say. "I'd like that," she replied, her voice stronger than she expected. Reed smiled, the expression transforming his weary face. "Good. I'll leave you my address before I go." He finally released her hand, tipping his hat to both women. "Ladies." As he walked out, Molly braced herself for Mrs. Porter's questions, or worse, her pity, but the older woman surprised her. "Well," Mrs. Porter said, her voice thoughtful, "he seems like a good man." "Yes," Molly agreed, "I think he is. Quite handsome, too." Mrs. Porter gave her a shrewd look. "And clearly interested in you, my dear." Molly felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "I hardly know him." "That's what letters are for," Mrs. Porter said with unexpected wisdom. "My late husband and I courted by mail for 6 months before we ever met face to face." She patted Molly's hand. "Don't let what people might say hold you back, child. Happiness is too rare to squander." With that surprising bit of advice, Mrs. Porter made her purchases and left, leaving Molly to wonder if perhaps she had misjudged the woman all these years, or if she had misjudged herself. That evening, as she was closing up, Reed returned, carrying a small package. "For you," he said, placing it on the counter. "Just something to remember me by until I return." Molly unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a small, leather-bound journal with blank pages and a fountain pen. "For your letters," he explained. "Though I hope you'll use it for more than that. You have thoughts worth capturing, Molly Zimmerman. I sensed that from the moment we met." "Thank you," she whispered, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "When do you leave?" "Dawn tomorrow." "It's a long ride to Austin." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be gone at least a month, maybe longer. The trial, well, these things take time." A month. It seemed an eternity. "I'll write," she promised. He smiled, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "My address in Austin. I'll be staying with an old friend who's a ranger now." Their fingers brushed as she took the paper, and that same jolt of awareness passed between them. Reed's eyes darkened, and for a breathless moment, Molly thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until we meet again, Molly Zimmerman," he said softly. Then he was gone, leaving her standing in the empty store with her heart pounding and the ghost of his kiss on her skin. True to his word, Reed left at dawn the next day. Molly watched from her bedroom window as he rode out of town, his prisoner securely bound in the back of a wagon under the watchful eyes of 2 Texas Rangers who had arrived the previous evening. She hadn't expected to see him again before he left, so she was surprised when he reined in his horse beneath her window, looking up as if he knew she would be watching. He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that seemed to carry more meaning than words could convey, then rode on. That same day, Molly began her first letter, pouring her thoughts onto the clean pages of the journal he had given her. It was strange how easy it was to write to this man she barely knew, to share thoughts and feelings she had kept hidden for years. She wrote about her life in Trinity, about growing up as the fat Zimmerman girl, about her dreams of something more than the back room of the mercantile. When she finished, She carefully tore out the pages and sealed them in an envelope, addressing it to Reed at the Austin address he had provided. To her surprise, his response came quickly, a thick envelope that arrived just 10 days after she had sent her letter. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and began to read. "Dear Molly," he wrote in that same strong, clear hand. "Your letter reached me just as my brother's trial was beginning. I cannot express what it meant to receive your words in such a dark time. You asked about my life before we met, so I will tell you." Reed's letter was a revelation, pages of confidences and stories that painted a picture of a complex man with a troubled past. He told her about growing up on a small ranch with his brother, about losing their parents to fever when he was 16, about the slow descent of his brother into lawlessness while Reed chose a different path. He wrote of his years as a bounty hunter, of the loneliness of the trail, of his secret dream of someday having a place of his own, with a woman who saw past his rough exterior to the man beneath. "I have never told anyone these things," he concluded, "but with you, the words come easily. Perhaps it is because you know what it is to be judged by appearances, to have others see only what they expect to see rather than who you truly are. I believe you see me, Molly Zimmerman, just as I see you, not as the world labels us, but as we really are." Molly read the letter 3 times before finally setting it aside, her heart full. That night, she began her response, writing long into the night by the light of her oil lamp. Their correspondence continued through the weeks of the trial, letters filled with growing intimacy and trust. Reed wrote of the difficulty of watching his brother in the courtroom, of the weight of responsibility he felt for not preventing his descent into violence. Molly shared her fears and insecurities, her anger at a world that had deemed her unworthy because of her size, her tentative hope that perhaps she deserved more than the shadows she had hidden in for so long. In Trinity, people noticed the change in her. She stood taller, spoke more confidently, even ventured to the social after church one Sunday, something she hadn't done in years. The whispers followed her, of course, speculation about her correspondence with the bounty hunter, predictions that he would never return once his business was concluded. "He'll break your heart, girl," her father warned one evening as he saw her writing yet another letter. "Men like that don't settle down, especially not with—" He trailed off, but Molly knew what he meant, not with women like her. "You don't know him," she replied quietly, continuing to write. Her mother was more direct. "He's just being kind, Molly. Don't read too much into it. A man like that could have any woman he wanted." "And yet he writes to me," Molly said, meeting her mother's gaze steadily. "Every week, pages and pages." Her parents exchanged concerned glances, but said no more. Molly understood their worry. They had watched her grow up isolated and ridiculed, had seen her retreat further into herself with each passing year. They wanted to protect her from further pain. But for the first time in her life, Molly was willing to risk being hurt for the chance at something more. As the weeks passed, her letters to Reed became more personal, more revealing. She found herself sharing thoughts she had never voiced aloud, her dreams of travel, of adventure, of a life where she wasn't defined by her appearance. And Reed responded in kind, revealing his hope for redemption, for a chance to build something good after years of tracking the worst of humanity. "I find myself counting the days until I can return to Trinity," he wrote in his 8th letter. "Not because of any fondness for the town, but because you are there. I have known many women in my 35 years, Molly, but none who made me wish to be a better man just by the simple act of seeing me as I could be, rather than as I am." 6 weeks after his departure, Reed's final letter arrived, shorter than the others but carrying news that made Molly's heart race. "The trial is concluded. My brother has been sentenced to hang, though I have petitioned for clemency on the grounds that he was wounded in the capture and not in his right mind during some of the crimes attributed to the gang. I do not know if my plea will be successful, but I have done what I can for him. I will be returning to Trinity within the week. There are things I wish to say to you, Molly Zimmerman, that cannot be adequately expressed on paper. Things I have been thinking since the moment I first saw you watching me through the mercantile window. Until then, know that you have become more important to me than I ever could have imagined. Yours, Reed, yours. The word echoed in Molly's mind as she folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. Could he truly mean it? Could a man like Red Jackson, who had seen so much of the world, really want someone like her? The days that followed were a torment of anticipation and doubt. Molly found herself checking her appearance more frequently, even venturing to order a new dress from Mrs. Henderson's shop, something in soft blue that brought out the gray of her eyes and, while it couldn't disguise her size, was cut to flatter rather than hide. Special occasion? Mrs. Henderson asked with a knowing smile as she took Molly's measurements. Just time for something new, Molly replied, but the blush on her cheeks told a different story. The dress was ready 2 days later, and not a moment too soon. As Molly was helping a customer that afternoon, the bell over the door jingled, and she looked up to see Reed standing in the entrance, hat in hand, his eyes finding hers immediately. He looked different, clean-shaven, his hair trimmed, wearing a new coat that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. But it was the expression on his face that caught her breath, a mixture of relief and anticipation, as if he had been as eager to see her as she had been to see him. "Reed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Molly." He stepped forward, seemingly oblivious to the curious customer watching their reunion. "I came as soon as I could." "Your brother?" she asked, remembering his petition for clemency. A shadow crossed his face. "The governor commuted his sentence to life imprisonment. It's more than he deserved, but I'm grateful he was spared the noose." "I'm glad," she said sincerely. "For your sake." The customer cleared her throat pointedly, and Molly flushed, remembering where they were. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Taylor. Let me finish helping you." She quickly completed the transaction, acutely aware of Reed waiting patiently by the door. When Mrs. Taylor finally left, casting a knowing glance between them as she went, Molly found herself suddenly shy, unsure what to say to this man who knew her thoughts better than anyone, yet had spent only a few brief moments in her physical presence. Reed solved the dilemma by crossing to the counter and taking her hands in his. "You look beautiful, Molly," he said simply. "That color suits you." The compliment, spoken with such sincerity, brought a flush to her cheeks. "Thank you, you look different." He smiled, a warm, genuine expression that transformed his face. "Thought I'd clean up a bit, didn't want to frighten you away." "You could never do that," she said softly. He squeezed her hands gently. "I meant what I wrote, Molly. Every word. These past weeks your letters have been. They've meant everything to me." "And yours to me," she admitted. His eyes searched hers, and whatever he saw there seemed to give him courage. "I'd like to court you properly, Molly Zimmerman, if you'll allow it." Court her? The idea seemed so improbable that for a moment Molly wondered if she had misheard. "You want to court me, more than anything." His voice was earnest, his gaze steady on hers. "I know it might seem sudden, but I feel like I've known you for years, not weeks. Your letters. You revealed yourself to me in those pages, Molly, and I found everything I've been looking for without knowing I was searching." It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to her, yet Molly couldn't quite silence the doubts that had been her companions for so long. "Reed, I'm not like other women, I'm not." She gestured helplessly at herself, unable to say the words. "Beautiful," he finished for her, his voice gentle. desirable, worthy of love, because I disagree on all counts." He released one of her hands to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. "I see you, Molly, not just your size, but all of you. Your kindness, your intelligence, your quiet strength. The way you've endured the cruelty of this town without becoming cruel yourself. The dreams you've kept alive despite everything." His voice deepened, grew more intense. "And yes, I see your beauty too, the warmth in your gray eyes, the softness of your skin, the way your whole face transforms when you truly smile." Tears welled in Molly's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. No one had ever spoken to her this way, had ever looked at her and seen anything worth desiring. "Don't cry," Reed murmured, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Unless they are happy tears." "They are," she assured him, managing a watery smile. "It's just hard to believe this is real." "It's real," he promised. "And if you'll give me the chance, I'll spend as long as it takes convincing you." The bell over the door jingled again, and they reluctantly stepped apart as a customer entered. Reed cleared his throat, settling his hat back on his head. "I should let you get back to work," he said, "but may I call on you this evening? Perhaps take you for a walk?" Molly nodded, her heart too full for words. "Until tonight, then." He tipped his hat, the gesture now familiar and dear, and left the store. Molly watched him go, her mind reeling from everything that had just transpired. Reed Jackson wanted to court her. Her, Molly Zimmerman, the woman who had spent her life hiding from the world. It seemed impossible, yet the warmth in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice had been undeniable. For the rest of the day, Molly moved through her tasks in a daze, replaying his words in her mind. Customers came and went, several commenting on her new dress or the unusual brightness in her eyes, but she scarcely registered their remarks. All she could think about was the evening to come and what it might mean for her future. When closing time finally arrived, she locked up with trembling fingers, then hesitated, unsure whether to wait for Reed at the store or return home first. Her question was answered when she turned to see him walking toward her, leading his black stallion by the reins. "I thought we might ride a little ways out of town," he said as he approached. "There's a place I found on my way back that I'd like to show you, if you're willing." Molly looked at the massive horse with trepidation. "I haven't ridden since I was a girl," she admitted, "and never on something so large." Reed smiled reassuringly. "Midnight's gentle as a lamb despite his size, and I'll be right there with you." Before she could protest further, he was beside her, his hands at her waist. "May I?" At her nod, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing, setting her sideways on the saddle. Molly clutched the pommel, her heart racing at both the height and the casual display of strength. Reed swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. "Comfortable?" he asked, his breath tickling her ear. "Yes," she replied, though comfortable wasn't quite the right word for the riot of sensations coursing through her, fear and excitement and something deeper, more primal, at the feel of his strong body so close to hers. They rode out of town slowly, Reed keeping the horse at an easy walk. Molly was acutely aware of the stares they attracted, but for once she didn't shrink from the attention. Let them look, she thought with newfound defiance. Let them see that Reed Jackson had chosen her. As they left the last buildings behind, Reed guided the horse off the main road onto a smaller trail that wound through a stand of cottonwoods. The evening was beautiful, the setting sun casting everything in a golden glow, the air sweet with the scent of wild sage and late summer flowers. "Where are we going?" Molly asked, relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait and the security of Reed's arms around her. "There's a spot by the creek just ahead," he replied. I camped there last night, thinking about what I wanted to say to you today. The intimacy of the admission warmed her. And did you decide? Some of it, he said, a smile in his voice. The rest? Well, I'm making it up as I go along. They emerged from the trees to find themselves on the bank of a small creek, where a grassy clearing opened up beneath a massive oak. Reed reined in the horse and dismounted, then reached up to help Molly down. His hands lingered at her waist for a moment before he reluctantly released her and tied Midnight to a nearby branch. It's beautiful here, Molly said, turning in a slow circle to take in the peaceful scene. I thought you might like it. Reed moved to stand beside her, close but not touching. It reminded me of a place I wrote to you about, the creek behind our ranch where I used to go fishing as a boy. I remember, she said softly. You said it was the one place you felt truly at peace. He looked at her with wonder in his eyes. You remembered that detail from one letter among many. I remember everything you wrote to me, Reed, she admitted. I've read your letters so many times I could probably recite them. Something shifted in his expression, then a softening, a vulnerability that matched her own. Molly, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly without worrying about sparing my feelings. Her heart skipped a beat. What is it? These past weeks, writing to you, thinking of you, they've meant everything to me. But I need to know if you feel the same way, if there's any chance that you could. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. That you could see a future with someone like me. A man with a violent past, who spent more time on the trail than in any one place. Molly studied him. This man who had become so dear to her through ink and paper, who stood before her now with his heart in his eyes. Reed, in your letters, you asked me once what I wanted most in life. Do you remember what I answered? He nodded slowly. You said you wanted to be seen, not just looked at, but truly seen and known for who you are. Yes. She took a step closer to him. And you've given me that gift. In your letters, in the way you look at me now, you see me, Red Jackson. Not just my size, not just the girl who hides in the shadows, but all of me. Her voice strengthened with conviction. So yes, I can see a future with you. I want that future more than I've ever wanted anything. Reed's face transformed with joy, and then he was closing the distance between them, taking her in his arms with a reverence that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Molly Zimmerman, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I believe I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you standing in that mercantile, trying so hard to be invisible yet shining so brightly I couldn't look away. Love. She whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Love, he confirmed. I love your mind, your heart, your courage. I love the way you see the world, the way you express yourself on paper, the way you've endured pain without letting it harden you. And yes, Molly, I love your body too, every soft, beautiful inch of it. No one had ever spoken to her with such passion, such sincerity. For a lifetime, Molly had been taught that her body was a source of shame, something to be hidden and diminished. To hear Reed speak of it with desire rather than disgust was almost more than she could comprehend. I don't know what to say, she admitted, overwhelmed by his declaration. Reed smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You don't have to say anything. Not yet. I know this is fast, that we're still getting to know each other in person. I just wanted you to know how I feel, what I hope for. But Molly did know what to say. The words rose from deep within her, from a place that had been waiting all her life for this moment. I love you too, Reed. I think I started falling the moment you defended me outside the mercantile, and your letters only deepened those feelings. His eyes darkened at her words, and he lifted a hand to cup her cheek. May I kiss you, Molly? He asked softly. I've been thinking about it since Austin. In answer, she tilted her face up to his. Reed bent his head, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing hunger as she responded to him. Molly had been kissed exactly once before, an awkward, fumbling encounter with a boy who had lost a dare. This was nothing like that. Reed's kiss was reverent yet passionate, his arms strong around her, his body warm against hers. When they finally parted, both breathless, Reed rested his forehead against hers. "I've been waiting to do that for 6 long weeks," he murmured. "It was worth the wait," she whispered back, feeling a boldness she had never known before. They stayed by the creek until the sun set, talking and kissing and planning. Reed spoke of his desire to settle down, to use the bounty money he had saved over the years to buy a small ranch. Molly shared her dream of perhaps opening a bookshop someday, a place where stories could transport people to other worlds as they had transported her throughout her lonely childhood. As twilight deepened into night, Reed reluctantly suggested they return to town. "Your parents will be worried," he said, helping her back onto Midnight's saddle. "They'll have more to worry about when I tell them about us," Molly said, only half joking. "They don't. That is, they're concerned about your intentions." Reed settled behind her, his arms once again encircling her waist. "Then I'll just have to speak with them directly," he said as he urged the horse into motion. "Make my intentions perfectly clear." "And what exactly are your intentions, Mr. Jackson?" Molly asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the quickening of her heart. His arms tightened around her, and his voice was serious when he replied. "To court you properly, Miss Zimmerman. To convince your parents that I'm worthy of their daughter. And eventually, if you'll have me, to make you my wife." Wife. The word hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Molly leaned back against his chest, allowing herself to imagine a future she had never thought possible, a home of their own, a life shared with this man who saw her and loved her exactly as she was. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." The ride back to town seemed all too short. As they approached the Zimmerman house, Molly could see her parents on the porch, clearly waiting for her return. Her father stood as they drew near, his expression a mixture of concern and disapproval. Reed dismounted first, then lifted Molly down, keeping a respectful distance between them as they approached the porch. "Evening, Mr. and Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, his voice steady and polite. "I hope you don't mind that I borrowed your daughter for a ride this evening." "It's well past supper time," her father said, his tone clipped. "We were concerned." "That's my fault, sir," Reed acknowledged. "I lost track of the time, but I'd like to speak with you if you're willing." Her father's eyebrows rose, but he nodded curtly. "Come inside, then." Molly looked between Reed and her parents, anxiety knotting her stomach. "Papa, Reed, and I—" "Inside, Molly," her mother interrupted, her voice unusually gentle. "Let's not have this conversation on the porch for all the neighbors to hear." The four of them moved into the parlor, where the remains of the evening meal still sat on the table. Reed declined Mrs. Zimmerman's belated offer of food, but accepted a cup of coffee. An uncomfortable silence fell as they settled around the table, broken only when Reed set down his cup with quiet determination. "Mr. and Mrs. Zimmerman," he began, "I understand you have concerns about my interest in your daughter. That's reasonable, given our brief acquaintance. But I want to be clear about my intentions." He looked at Molly, his eyes warm. "I care deeply for Molly. In fact, I've fallen in love with her." Her mother gasped softly, and her father's frown deepened. "You barely know each other," he objected. "With respect, sir, that's not entirely true," Reed replied. "Molly and I have been corresponding regularly during my absence. We've shared our thoughts, our pasts, our hopes for the future. I know her character, her mind, her heart, and she knows mine. Letters aren't the same as living with someone day to day. Mrs. Zimmerman pointed out. And your profession, it's dangerous. Uncertain, Reed nodded. You're right. That's why I'm retiring from bounty hunting. The reward for my brother's capture was substantial, and I've saved most of what I've earned over the years. I plan to buy a small ranch just outside of town, put down roots. Henry Zimmerman studied him skeptically. And what makes you think you'd be happy settling down? Men like you are used to freedom, to the open road. Men like me, Reed repeated, a hint of steel entering his voice. You mean men who have spent their lives alone with no family to call their own. Men who have seen too much violence and are tired of it. Because that's who I am, Mr. Zimmerman. And the only freedom I want now is the freedom to build a life with someone who sees past my reputation to the man I really am. His gaze shifted to Molly. Your daughter gives me that. Molly's heart swelled at his words, at the quiet dignity with which he defended their relationship. I love him, Papa, she said softly. I know it seems sudden to you, but it's real. Her father's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. She realized with a start that it was the first time she had ever openly defied him, had ever stated what she wanted without hesitation or apology. Something like respect flickered in his eyes before he turned back to Reed. What exactly are you asking for, Jackson? Your blessing to court your daughter properly, Reed replied without hesitation. I'm not asking for her hand yet. That will come when Molly is ready, and when I've proven to both of you that my intentions are honorable. Henry and Margaret exchanged a long look, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, her father sighed. You seem like a decent man, Jackson. And God knows Molly deserves some happiness. He fixed Reed with a stern gaze. But if you hurt my daughter, there won't be a place in Texas far enough for you to hide from me. Reed met his gaze steadily. If I ever hurt her, sir, I wouldn't try to hide. Another long moment passed, then Henry nodded, a grudging acceptance in the gesture. All right, then. You have my permission to court Molly, but I expect you to respect our rules. She'll continue living here until circumstances change. Of course, sir, Reed agreed. Thank you. Margaret Zimmerman rose, smoothing her skirts with nervous hands. It's late, she said, her voice steadier than Molly had expected. Perhaps Mr. Jackson should be going. Reed stood immediately. Yes, madam, thank you for your hospitality. He turned to Molly, his eyes conveying what he couldn't say in front of her parents. Good night, Molly. May I call on you tomorrow? Yes, she replied, not caring if her eagerness was obvious. I'd like that very much. He nodded to her parents once more, then let himself out. Through the window, Molly watched him mount Midnight and ride away, his straight back and proud posture a far cry from the hesitant, self-conscious figure she had presented to the world for so long. Well, her mother said after a moment, that was unexpected. He loves me, Mama, Molly said, turning to face her parents. And I love him. Oh, my dear girl. Margaret crossed the room to take Molly's hands in hers. I just don't want you to be hurt. Men can say many pretty things when they're courting. Reed isn't like that, Molly insisted. He sees me, really sees me. Do you know how rare that is? Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Of course I do, I've watched you hide yourself away for so long, Molly. I've seen how cruel people can be. I wanted to protect you from more pain. I know, Molly said softly. But I can't hide forever. Reed makes me want to step into the light. Her father cleared his throat gruffly. If he's the man he appears to be, then you have our blessing, Molly, but you take your time. Make sure this is what you truly want. Molly hugged her parents, her heart full of gratitude for their cautious acceptance. As she climbed the stairs to her room later that night, she felt lighter than she had in years, as if some heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in her life, Molly Zimmerman was looking forward to tomorrow without fear or dread, but with excitement and hope. Reed was as good as his word. The following morning, he appeared at the mercantile just as Molly was opening up, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For you," he said, presenting them with a smile that made her heart skip. "Good morning, Molly." "Good morning," she replied, accepting the flowers with a blush. "They're beautiful." "Like you," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Molly's blush deepened, but she didn't look away or deny the compliment as she once would have. Instead, she found a jar for the flowers and placed them on the counter where she could see them throughout the day. "I have something to show you later if you're willing," Reed said, watching her arrange the blooms. "After you close the store." "What is it?" she asked curiously. His smile turned mysterious. "A surprise, but I think you'll like it." He didn't stay long, mindful of the customers beginning to arrive, but his brief visit set the tone for Molly's day. She moved through her tasks with a lightness that drew notice from the regular patrons of the mercantile. Mrs. Porter, of course, was the first to comment. "You're positively glowing today, Molly," she observed, her eyes taking in the wildflowers on the counter. "I take it Mr. Jackson has made his intentions clear." "Yes," Molly admitted, seeing no point in denying what would soon be common knowledge. "He's asked my father's permission to court me." Mrs. Porter beamed. "Wonderful. I told Herbert it was only a matter of time. The way that man looked at you when he returned from Austin, well, it was obvious to anyone with eyes." "Obvious," Molly echoed, startled by the idea that others had noticed Reed's interest before she had fully believed it herself. "Oh my, yes, like a man who's found water after crossing the desert." Mrs. Porter patted her hand. "Not everyone in this town is blind or cruel, my dear. Some of us have been hoping you'd find happiness for a very long time." The unexpected kindness brought tears to Molly's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Porter." "Pish," the older woman said, waving away her gratitude. "Now, I need a pound of coffee and some of that peppermint candy my husband pretends not to have a weakness for." As the day progressed, Molly was struck by the subtle changes in how people interacted with her. There were still sideways glances, still whispers, but there was also a new respect in how some addressed her, as if Reed's attention had suddenly made her visible in a way she had never been before. It was both gratifying and irritating. Molly knew she was the same person she had always been, worthy of respect regardless of whether a handsome man courted her. By closing time, her emotions were a complex mixture of joy, anticipation, and a lingering anger at the years of dismissal she had endured. As promised, Reed appeared just as she was locking up, this time riding a wagon rather than his stallion. "Ready for your surprise?" he asked, helping her up onto the seat beside him. "More than ready," she replied, curious about what he had planned. They rode out of town in the opposite direction from their previous excursion, following the main road for several miles before turning onto a smaller track that wound through rolling pastureland. Finally, Reed reined in the horses before a small homestead nestled in a grove of oak trees, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, a vegetable garden already planted, and a creek running along one boundary of the property. "What is this place?" Molly asked, taking in the peaceful scene. Reed's expression was a mixture of pride and nervousness. "It's mine. I bought it this morning." "Yours," she repeated, stunned. "You bought a ranch today," he nodded, helping her down from the wagon. "I've been looking at properties since I wrote to you from Austin." The owner was eager to sell. He's moving to California to join his daughter. When I saw it yesterday, I knew it was perfect. He took her hand, his gaze intense. "I want to show you something." He led her toward the cabin, a solid structure built of logs with a stone chimney and a small porch across the front. The door was unlocked, and Reed ushered her inside. The interior was simple but well-maintained, a main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, and two doors leading to what Molly assumed were bedrooms. "It needs some work," Reed acknowledged, watching her reaction carefully. "And furniture. The previous owner took most of his with him. But the bones are good." "It's lovely," Molly said honestly, touched by his eagerness to share this with her. Reed squeezed her hand. "There's one more thing I want you to see." He guided her to one of the doors off the main room and opened it. Inside was a small, sun-filled space with built-in shelves lining one wall and a window seat overlooking the creek. "I thought." He hesitated, suddenly unsure. "I thought this could be your bookshop someday, or a library at least to start, a place for your books." Molly stared at the room, then at Reed, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of his gesture. He had remembered her dream, had created a space for it within his own. "You did this for me," she whispered. "For us," he corrected gently. "If you want it to be. I know it's too soon to ask you to live here with me, but I wanted you to see it, to know that I'm building a future with you in mind." His eyes searched hers anxiously. "Is it too much? Too fast?" In answer, Molly rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, pouring all her emotions into the gesture, her gratitude, her wonder, her growing love for this man who saw her dreams as clearly as he saw her. When they broke apart, Reed was smiling, the tension gone from his shoulders. "I'll take that as approval," he murmured. "It's perfect," she assured him. "All of it. I just can't believe you did this so quickly." "When you know what you want, why wait?" he said simply. "And I know what I want, Molly Zimmerman. A home, a life, a future with you." They explored the rest of the property together, Reed pointing out his plans for expanding the garden, for building up the small herd of cattle that came with the land, for adding to the cabin as their needs grew. Molly listened, her mind full of images of what their life might be like here, meals shared by the fireplace, books filling the shelves he had shown her, perhaps someday children playing in the yard, children. The thought should have frightened her, but somehow, with Reed, it felt right, a natural extension of the love growing between them. As the sun began to set, they reluctantly prepared to return to town. Before they left, Reed led Molly to a massive oak tree that stood near the cabin, its spreading branches creating a cathedral-like canopy above them. "I have one more surprise," he said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much, and if it's too soon, you can tell me." He opened his hand to reveal a small silver ring set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of hers I kept all these years. I'm not asking for an answer now, Molly. I know we need time. But I want you to have this as a promise that whenever you're ready, whether it's next month or next year, I'll be here, loving you, waiting for you to be my wife." Tears filled Molly's eyes as she looked at the simple ring, at the man offering it to her with such sincerity. All her life, she had believed that love, true love, the kind that saw past appearances to the soul beneath, wasn't meant for women like her. Yet here was Reed Jackson, offering her exactly that. "I don't need a year," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Or even a month. I know what I want too, Reed. I want you, this place, our future together." Reed's face lit with joy. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," Molly confirmed, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, Reed rested his forehead against hers, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise you won't regret this, Molly. I'll spend my life making you happy." "You already have," she assured him, her heart so full it seemed impossible that her body could contain it. "By seeing me, by loving me as I am." They rode back to town in the gathering dusk, Molly's hand firmly in Reed's, the pearl ring catching the last light of day. She knew there would be talk when people saw it, knew her parents might think they were moving too quickly, but for once in her life, Molly didn't care what others thought. She was stepping out of the shadows into the light of Reed's love, and nothing, not gossip, not doubt, not the ghosts of old insecurities, would pull her back into darkness. Her parents' reaction was exactly as she had anticipated: concern about the speed of their engagement, worry that Reed's settling down might be temporary, fear that Molly would end up heartbroken. But there was acceptance too, grudging from her father, more willing from her mother, who had seen the change in her daughter over the past weeks. "If this is truly what you want, Molly, we won't stand in your way," Henry Zimmerman finally said after a long discussion. "But I'd feel better about it if you had a proper engagement period, at least a few months." Reed, who had expected nothing less, readily agreed. "Sir, I respect your concerns. I'm happy to wait as long as Molly feels is necessary before we marry. But I want you to know that my intentions are permanent. I've put down roots here, bought land, started building a home. I'm not going anywhere." "And the bounty hunting?" Margaret asked. "Are you truly done with that life?" "Completely," Reed assured her. "I have more than enough saved to build our future, and the ranch will provide our living going forward. My days of tracking outlaws are over." It was decided, after much discussion, that they would marry in 3 months' time, long enough to satisfy propriety, short enough to acknowledge the depth of their commitment. Molly would continue living with her parents until the wedding, while Reed would stay in town only long enough to hire help for the ranch, then move out to the cabin to prepare it for their life together. The news of their engagement spread through Trinity like wildfire. Most offered congratulations, some with genuine warmth, others with barely concealed surprise or skepticism. The cowboys who had confronted Reed that first night made themselves scarce, perhaps fearing his retribution, or perhaps simply accepting that he was now a part of the community rather than a dangerous outsider. True to his word, Reed threw himself into preparing the ranch, hiring a local man and his sons to help with repairs and improvements to the cabin, purchasing furniture and supplies, and beginning to build up his small herd of cattle. Molly continued working at the mercantile, but now spent her Sundays at the ranch, helping Reed plan their future home. Together, they filled the shelves in what Reed called Molly's library with books ordered from catalogs or purchased from travelers passing through. They planted flowers around the cabin, chose curtains for the windows, discussed which furniture would go where. With each decision, each shared dream, the bond between them deepened beyond the initial attraction into something lasting and true. As the wedding day approached, Molly found herself standing before her mirror with new eyes. The woman who looked back at her was still large, still far from the ideal of beauty celebrated in ladies' magazines and whispered about by the young girls of Trinity. But she was also strong, capable of love and being loved, worthy of the happiness she had found. The shadows that had been her refuge for so long now seemed like a prison she had built for herself, a prison that Reed had helped her escape with his unflinching gaze and honest heart. They were married on a perfect October day, with the leaves of the oak trees turning gold and red around them. The ceremony was held at the ranch, under the massive tree where Reed had proposed. Most of Trinity attended, some out of genuine goodwill, others out of curiosity. Molly wore a dress of deep blue silk that Mrs. Henderson had made especially for her, designed to enhance rather than disguise her figure. Reed stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows. "I promise to love you as you are, to stand beside you in all things, to be your partner and your friend for all the days of our lives," Reed said. his voice carrying clear and strong over the assembled guests. "I promise to love you without reservation, to support you in your goals, to laugh with you and cry with you, to grow old with you, and to always remember this moment of perfect joy," Molly replied, her heart in every word. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Reed kissed her without hesitation or shame, claiming her before the entire town as his chosen bride. The cheers that followed were genuine, even from those who had once been cruel in their judgments. Later, as they danced under lantern light in their new yard, Reed pulled Molly close and whispered in her ear, "Happy, Mrs. Jackson." "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, tightening her arms around his neck. "Thank you for seeing me, Reed, for bringing me into the light." His eyes, so clear and blue, shone with love as he looked down at her. "You were always meant for the light, Molly. You just needed someone to remind you of that." As the years passed, the Jackson Ranch prospered under their care. Reed proved to be a natural rancher, his skills as a tracker and his knowledge of the land serving him well in his new profession. Molly's library expanded to include a small bookshop that served not only Trinity but the surrounding communities, becoming a gathering place for those who shared her love of stories and knowledge. Their first child, a son they named Henry after Molly's father, arrived a year after their wedding, a robust, healthy boy with Reed's blue eyes and Molly's warm smile. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Margaret, followed by another son, James, the year after that. Their family grew along with their ranch, their happiness deepening with each passing season. Molly's relationship with her body changed too over time. Carrying and nursing 3 children left its marks, added new curves to her already ample figure. But Reed's desire for her never wavered, his appreciation for her softness, her fullness, a constant reminder that beauty existed outside the narrow confines of conventional standards. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Reed surprised Molly with a special dinner on the porch of their now expanded cabin, the children safely in bed, the night sky ablaze with stars above them. 10 years, he marveled, raising his glass to hers. "The best 10 years of my life." "Mine too," she agreed, thinking of all they had built together, their home, their family, their place in the community. No one in Trinity looked at her with pity or contempt anymore. She was Mrs. Reed Jackson, respected businesswoman, beloved wife and mother, valued friend to many. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Reed asked, his eyes thoughtful in the lamplight. "When I walked into the mercantile and saw you trying so hard not to be seen," Molly smiled at the memory. "I was so sure you'd look right through me like everyone else did." "Impossible," he said simply. "You shone too brightly to ignore, Molly. You always have." He reached across the table to take her hand, his touch as tender now as it had been a decade ago. "I thank God every day that I found you, and I thank God you helped me find myself," she replied softly. "The woman I was always meant to be, before the world taught me to hide." Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Reed's arms strong and secure around her, Molly reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the shadowed corners of her father's mercantile to this life filled with light and love, she had traveled farther than any physical distance could measure. And Reed had been there every step of the way, believing in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. "I love you," she whispered, pressing closer to him in the darkness. "I love you too," he murmured back, his voice heavy with sleep. "Always have, always will." As Molly drifted toward sleep, she thought of the frightened, self-loathing young woman she had once been, hiding from the world's cruel gaze. If she could reach back through time and speak to that woman, she would tell her to be brave, to step out of the shadows, to trust that someone would see her true worth. She would tell her that love doesn't demand perfection or conformity. It simply asks for authenticity, the courage to be exactly who you are and to let yourself be seen, completely and without apology. And she would tell her that sometimes, when you least expect it, a hand reaches out of the darkness to guide you into the light. All you have to do is be brave enough to take it.